Make sure to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss a new story. I've hosted dozens of dinners in our home over the years. Some big, some small. Most of them followed the same rhythm. Mark charming the room with stories from work, me playing the attentive hostess, making sure everyone had enough wine and warmth. I used to love it, the cozy predictability of it all. But something about this particular evening felt off. And I didn't know why yet. It was a cool autumn evening, the kind where the air has that crispness that makes candles feel cozier, food smell richer, and music sound a little softer. I had roasted a lemon garlic chicken, filled the dining room with the scent of rosemary, and lit a few candles to warm up the space. Mark had invited 3 of his co-workers, 2 of whom I'd met many times before. The third one, though, Nathan, I didn't know well. He was newer at the firm. Younger. Charismatic. The type of man who seemed to command attention without trying. I had only exchanged pleasantries with him at past events. But even then I remembered how he looked directly at people. Too directly, maybe. Like he was always searching for something in their reaction. He arrived a little late with a bottle of red wine in one hand and that too polished smile on his face. "Hope I'm not too late to the party," he said as he stepped inside. I smiled, taking the wine. Right on time. Our fingers brushed. Just briefly, but the touch lingered longer than necessary. I pulled my hand back instinctively. His eyes met mine, and for the faintest second, it felt deliberate. I shook it off. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just Nathan being Nathan. The rest of the guests arrived soon after, and the evening moved on. Mark was in his element, telling stories from the office, animated and laughing. Everyone seemed at ease. I stayed busy topping off wine glasses, offering seconds, laughing politely. But every now and then I'd feel it, that strange weight of someone watching me. And every time I looked up, there he was. Nathan. Not staring. Just watching. Like I was a puzzle he already knew the answer to. Later in the evening, when Mark and his boss became locked in a conversation about some upcoming presentation, Nathan and I ended up sitting near the fireplace with our glasses of wine. "You know, Emily," he said smoothly, "Mark is a lucky man." I gave him a polite smile. "Well, I like to think I'm lucky too." He leaned in slightly, his gaze steady. "If I were him, I don't think I'd ever leave your side." I froze. There was no misreading it. The tone, the way he said it. This wasn't playful flirtation. This was intentional. Bold. I laughed nervously. "I think he feels the same," I said, trying to steer the moment back to safety. Nathan didn't push. He just sat back, sipped his wine, and smiled as though he hadn't just said something wildly inappropriate. The night wound down eventually. Guests started putting on coats, saying their goodbyes. Mark walked a few people to their cars. I stayed behind, clearing plates. And then Nathan appeared in the doorway. "It was nice spending time with you tonight," he said, voice lower now. "Different." "Thanks for coming," I said, not meeting his eyes. He took a step closer. "I hope we get to do this again. Maybe, just the 2 of us sometime." I turned to him, stunned into silence. But before I could respond, Mark returned, clapping him on the back like they were lifelong friends. "Glad you could make it, buddy. Drive safe." Nathan gave me one last glance. A smirk. And walked out the door. I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest, lips parted but voiceless. Mark locked the door behind him and smiled. "That went well, don't you think? Everyone seemed to have a good time." I forced a smile. "Yeah," I said. "It was a good night." But as I lay awake in bed hours later, staring up at the ceiling, I knew the truth. Something had changed. And deep down I could feel it. This wasn't over. The next morning I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I lay in bed a little longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts spinning inside me. Was it really that bad? Had I overreacted? Was Nathan just being flirty? Friendly? Stupid? But no matter how many ways I tried to reframe it, the facts remained. He said what he said. He looked at me the way he did. And whatever that was, it wasn't harmless. I heard Mark in the kitchen, the low clink of mugs and the rich smell of coffee drifting upstairs. His usual Saturday rhythm. I wrapped myself in my robe and made my way down, my thoughts still tangled. He looked up and smiled when I entered. "Morning, Han," he said, handing me a steaming cup without missing a beat. "Sleep okay?" "Yeah," I lied, taking the mug and forcing a smile. The warmth of the ceramic against my palms didn't reach the chill still lodged in my chest. Mark sipped his own coffee and leaned against the counter casually. "Nathan texted me this morning." My heart stopped. "He said he had a great time last night. Wants to get together again soon." He chuckled. "I told him we should do a double date. That new steakhouse downtown." I nearly dropped my cup. A million things rushed to my lips. No, absolutely not. He crossed a line. He made me uncomfortable. He tried to corner me in our house. But nothing came out. Dad, I smiled. Just a twitch of the lips. "That sounds nice," I heard myself say. Mark grinned. "Great. I'll set it up." I nodded, taking another sip of coffee to hide my trembling hands. The days that followed were a blur of distraction. I threw myself into errands, caught up on laundry that didn't need catching up, reorganized a drawer that hadn't been opened in months. Anything to keep my mind busy. Anything to stop myself from obsessively replaying Nathan's voice in my head. And then, like a slap, it came, a text from him. "Hey Emily. Hope you're having a great day. Can't stop thinking about our conversation the other night." My stomach turned. I stared at the message, unsure whether to scream, cry, or throw my phone out the window. Instead I typed, "Hey Nathan. I think you might have misunderstood something. I'm happily married and I'd appreciate it if you kept things professional." I hit send with a shaky breath, hoping, foolishly, that it would be enough. Seconds later my phone buzzed again. "Of course, Emily. I respect that. Just saying, if things were different." My hands clenched into fists. It wasn't just a message. It was a door left open on purpose. A door he was daring me to shut or step through. I didn't reply. 2 days later the double date came. I thought about canceling. I considered faking a migraine, a forgotten commitment, a sudden illness. But I didn't want to make Mark suspicious. I didn't want to cause a rift based on something he still didn't understand. So I went. I put on a navy dress. Simple. Elegant. Safe. I stared at myself in the mirror before we left, wondering if anyone would see the war going on beneath the calm exterior. We arrived first. Nathan and his wife Rachel were already seated when we walked in. Rachel was lovely, sweet, gracious, the kind of woman who smiled with her whole heart. She greeted me warmly, complimented my dress, asked about my day. Nathan? He barely looked at me when we arrived. But I could feel it. The weight of his gaze hovering just beneath the surface. Dinner was fine. On the surface at least. Nathan played the perfect gentleman. Jokes. Polite conversation. Occasional praise of his wife. But every now and then his eyes would find mine. Flicker too long. A brush of his knee under the table. A whisper of tension in the air only I seemed to feel. And then when Rachel and Mark got caught in conversation he leaned in close. "You're even more beautiful when you're nervous." That was it. The line. The final straw. I turned to him, straightening my back. My voice didn't shake. "Nathan," I said clearly, loud enough for Mark and Rachel to hear. "I don't think it's appropriate for you to talk to me like that." Silence fell across the table like a dropped plate. Mark blinked. "What?" Rachel looked between us, confused. "Nathan." He chuckled, forced. "It was just a joke." "It didn't feel like one," I said calmly. Nathan fumbled. "Just a misunderstanding. Let's not make this awkward." But it already was. And I didn't care. Mark's voice was soft but serious. "Emily, are you okay?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. "No. I don't think I want to be here anymore." He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He simply nodded. "Then let's go." We stood up. I gave Rachel an apologetic look. She was still stunned. Nathan looked like he wanted to say something, but I didn't wait. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my heart thudding, and Mark right by my side. I didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was certain. Nathan had just made a mistake he wouldn't be able to charm his way out of. The ride home was quieter than any we'd taken in years. Mark drove with one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on his thigh, flexing and relaxing in a silent rhythm. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, but I could feel the questions brewing inside him. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red, my thoughts louder than the silence between us. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the engine hummed for a moment before Mark turned the key and shut it off. Still neither of us moved. Then softly he spoke. "Emily, he said, his voice low. What happened back there? I exhaled slowly, bracing myself. You really want to know? I do. I turned in my seat to face him, the overhead light catching the concern in his eyes. This was it, the moment I stopped protecting someone who didn't deserve my silence. Nathan's been making me uncomfortable for weeks, I began. Since that dinner party at our house. That night he brushed my hand and said something strange. I thought maybe I was overreacting. But it didn't stop there. Mark frowned. What do you mean? I steadied my breath. He sent me a text a few days after, telling me he couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. I told him to stop, that I was happily married and I wanted things to stay professional. But then he sent another message. Said, just saying, if things were different. Mark's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. And tonight, I continued, he said I looked more beautiful when I'm nervous. Right in front of you. Right in front of his wife. Mark's mouth tightened into a hard line. His voice dropped. Emily, why didn't you tell me sooner? My eyes welled, but I blinked them dry. Because I didn't know if I was imagining it. Because he's your colleague. I didn't want to make trouble for you at work. I thought maybe I could handle it myself. Mark was silent for a long moment, then said, more to himself than to me, you are my wife. You come first. Always. I reached over and took his hand. I know. I just didn't want to believe it was as serious as it felt. But when I saw the way he looked at me tonight, and the way he smirked when I called him out, I knew it was never just a misunderstanding. Mark looked at me, really looked at me. And for the first time since this started, I saw something in his face that grounded me again. Unwavering support. We're not letting this slide, he said firmly. I don't care how charming he is or how good he is at work. This ends now. I nodded, tears finally breaking free. But they weren't just tears of fear anymore. They were tears of relief. Because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. The weight I'd been holding in silence was now shared. We sat in the car for another minute, holding hands, letting the quiet settle into something steadier. When we finally got out and stepped into the house, I felt the first flicker of safety return. Not because the problem was gone, but because the truth was no longer hiding. And I had someone beside me who believed me without question. Nathan had underestimated me. But more than that, he had underestimated us. The next morning, the house was still when I woke up, eerily calm, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. I walked downstairs to find Mark already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with his phone in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. He looked up the moment he heard me and gave me a look that told me everything. He hadn't slept much either. He set his phone down. Nathan texted me, he said without ceremony. My stomach dropped. What did he say? Mark's voice tightened. He said he hopes last night didn't cause any unnecessary drama. I scoffed, the anger rising before I could swallow it. Unnecessary drama? He's trying to act like none of it meant anything, Mark said, rubbing his jaw. Like you misread it all. Like I'm overreacting now. And what did you say back? Mark looked up at me, his jaw set. Nothing. Because I'm going to tell him in person. At work. Today. I hesitated. Are you sure that's a good idea? I'm not letting him spin this, he said firmly. He crossed a line, more than once. He doesn't get to keep walking around like nothing happened. Something in his voice made me feel steadier. Like I was no longer hoping he would protect me, he already was. That afternoon was one of the longest of my life. I tried to keep busy, laundry, phone calls, half-hearted attempts at emails, but I couldn't focus. I kept checking my phone, waiting for news, bracing myself for the sound of Mark's car in the driveway. At 3:04 p.m. my phone buzzed. Nathan. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Can we talk? Just the two of us. I froze. 30 minutes later, another message. Come on, Emily. Let's be adults about this. The audacity. The calculated charm. The way he refused to take a clear no for an answer. My pulse raced. My hands trembled. But my anger had begun to outgrow my fear. I blocked his number. And then I called Mark. He came home early that evening. The second he walked through the door, I knew. His jaw was clenched. His eyes were tired but burning. I didn't even get a chance to speak before he said it. I confronted him. I held my breath. What happened? Mark exhaled slowly and set his briefcase down with a heaviness that matched the weight in his chest. At first he tried to laugh it off, he said. Said I was being ridiculous. Said you were reading too much into things. But I didn't let him twist it. I made it very clear. He is never to contact you again. Ever. And he just accepted that? Mark shook his head. Not right away. He got defensive. But I didn't back down. I told him I trust you completely. That this conversation was over. And if he even looked at you the wrong way again, I'd go straight to our boss and HR. I stared at him, speechless for a moment. My chest tightened. Not from anxiety this time, but from something else. Something deeper. You really did that? I asked, my voice quiet. Mark stepped closer, wrapping his arms around me. Of course I did. Emily, I will always stand up for you. You should never have to face something like this alone. And that's when the tears came, not out of fear but out of sheer release. After carrying so much so quietly for so long, I finally felt seen. And safe. I didn't know how to tell you, I whispered into his shoulder. I was afraid it would cause problems for you. He pulled back and looked into my eyes. The only problem I have is someone thinking they can disrespect my wife and get away with it. That's not going to happen. Not now. Not ever. Later that night I stood at the kitchen window watching the light fade from the sky. For the first time in days I wasn't consumed by dread. Nathan's words still echoed. But they didn't own me anymore. Because now I had something stronger than fear. Truth, support, and a fire in my chest that wasn't going out anytime soon. 2 days later I found myself pushing a grocery cart down the produce aisle, trying to focus on simple things. Apples, spinach, fresh bread. Ordinary tasks had started to feel comforting again. Almost like a ritual of reclaiming peace. Until I felt it. That unmistakable chill at the back of my neck. Like someone was watching. I paused near the oranges, gripping the cart handle tighter. Please no. Not here. Not now. I turned my head slowly and there he was. Nathan. Standing just a few feet away, casually inspecting a row of apples as if he just happened to be there. But I knew better. This store was nowhere near his office. Nowhere near where he lived. He had no reason to be here. Except one. Me. My heart kicked into overdrive. My body tensed. But I forced myself to stay still. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me afraid. He looked up, noticed that I'd seen him and smiled. Emily, he said smoothly like we were old friends. Fancy seeing you here. I didn't reply. I grabbed a bag of oranges and started to move on. But he followed. One step. Then you. No need to be rude, he said, voice still soft, still dripping with faux charm. After all, I think there's been a little misunderstanding between us. I stopped and turned to face him fully. My heart pounded, but my voice came out steady. There's no misunderstanding, Nathan. You crossed a line. More than once. And you need to stay away from me. His smile faltered for a split second but then returned. That smug, knowing twist of the mouth. Come on now, he said. Don't be dramatic. The words slammed into me like a slap. Dramatic. As if my boundaries were performance. As if my fear was some inconvenient emotion he could brush aside. I stepped closer, just enough for him to see I wasn't afraid. You texted me after I told you to stop, I said. You showed up here knowing you had no reason to be here. That's not charming. That's not harmless. That's harassment. His eyes darkened. You know, he said, voice dropping lower, a woman like you attract attention. Not all of it good. And there was. Not a compliment. A warning. I felt it in my bones. The shift from flirty manipulation to calculated menace. My hands trembled but I didn't back down. Are you threatening me? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. He raised both hands slowly, mock innocence written across his face. Not at all, he said. Just making an observation. That smile was still there but the mask had cracked. I saw what was behind it now. Control. Power. Arrogance. And something else. Fear. Because I wasn't shrinking like he expected me to. I turned my back on him, walked away without another word. My hands were shaking but my spine was steel. I abandoned my cart and went straight to my car, locking the doors the moment I got inside. My chest was tight but I refused to cry. Instead I picked up my phone and dialed the only person I needed right now. Mark. He came home early that evening. His face said it all, he was furious. He followed you? He asked, voice sharp and low, barely containing the fire building beneath the surface. Yes, I said. And he wasn't just being creepy. He was trying to scare me. Mark ran a hand through his hair and began pacing. That's it. I'm done playing nice. I swallowed hard. What are you going to do? He stopped and looked at me, eyes burning with clarity. I'm going to our boss. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to H. And Nathan doesn't get to do this. Not to you. Not to anyone. Something in me broke open, not in fear but in relief. Because I wasn't in this alone. Because someone finally saw the shadows I'd been standing in and stepped into them with me. Because Nathan had underestimated me, and underestimated what love looks like when it protects instead of ignores. The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I sat at the table stirring my coffee waiting. Mark had left earlier than usual, wearing that look he wears when he's made up his mind and nothing will stand in his way. He was headed to his office and to his boss with one purpose: to make sure Nathan faced consequences. Part of me felt uneasy. Part of me felt like I was still bracing for something else. Another text. Another appearance. Another reminder that what I felt wasn't over. But mostly I felt something else now. Resolve. I had spent too many days feeling powerless. Now I was standing in something stronger. Around noon I got the message I'd been waiting for. Mark. It's done. Formal complaint filed. I spoke to both our manager and HR. They took it seriously. I stared at the message, reading it twice, 3 times. It's done. The words echoed in my mind like a bell. Loud. Final. Thought. For the first time in weeks, I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was still holding. That evening, Mark walked through the front door looking exhausted, but lighter. I met him in the hallway. What happened? I asked softly. He set his bag down, rubbed the back of his neck, and let out a long sigh. It wasn't easy. I sat in a room with our manager, then with HR. I told them everything. The texts. The comments. The intimidation. And I told them I believed you, every word. Tears stung the back of my eyes. He continued, they said they've had no formal complaints about him before. But they've heard things. Nothing on record. But whispers. Your report changed that. My chest tightened, not with fear but with something else. A sobering truth. I wasn't the first. I just happened to be the first to say something out loud. What about Nathan? I asked. Mark looked at me, jaw tense. He knows. HR contacted him. They've launched a formal investigation. He was rattled. I didn't reply. But inside something shifted. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. By the end of the week, the news came quietly but clearly. Nathan had resigned. Personal reasons, they said. Pursuing new opportunities. But we knew the truth. He was gone. Gone from Mark's office. Gone from our lives. Gone from every corner of my day where he had haunted me. And with him a weight lifted. I sat outside on the back porch that weekend, warm mug in hand, cool breeze brushing across my face. Mark came out a few minutes later and joined me, sitting beside me in silence for a long while. You okay? He finally asked. I nodded slowly. Yeah. I think I finally am. He reached for my hand, fingers lacing through mine. He didn't speak, but I felt everything I needed to feel in the quiet warmth of his touch. Safe. Respected. Protected. That moment didn't erase what had happened. But it became the start of something new. The start of me reclaiming my voice. My space. My peace. Nathan had tried to make me feel small. But in the end he just reminded me how strong I really was. And I was done letting anyone shrink me again. The days that followed Nathan's resignation felt surreal. The threat was gone, but the echo of it still lingered. It's funny how trauma works. How it settles in the body like dust in forgotten corners. Even when the danger has passed, your heart still flinches at shadows. But now there was space. Space to exhale. To reflect. To feel. And I let myself do all of it. I no longer jumped at every text notification. I no longer scanned the room every time I went out alone. I walked through the grocery store 2 days later and lingered in the produce aisle just to prove I could. I touched the oranges, smelled the fresh basil, and reminded myself, he's gone. That part of the story was over. One afternoon I found myself sitting in the sunroom, my favorite quiet corner of the house, with a notebook in my lap and a pen poised between my fingers. Not a to-do list. Not a grocery run. Not reminders for the week. Just blank paper. And me. It had been so long since I'd written anything personal, anything from the heart. I didn't know where to begin. So I wrote the first thing that came to mind. I am not weak for being afraid. I am strong because I faced it. And from there the words poured out. I wrote about how I'd silenced myself for too long. How shame tried to wrap itself around me like a fog. How guilt whispered lies that I had invited it. Ignored it. Made it worse by waiting too long. But the truth I kept coming back to was this. Speaking up is never too late. And being believed? That changes everything. Mark had changed too. I noticed the little things first. The way he listened when I spoke. The way he asked questions and waited for real answers. The way he started calling me during the day not to check in but just to say hi. One evening we sat on the couch watching a movie and he reached over to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. I know this probably sounds silly, he said, but I'm proud of you. I looked at him surprised. For what? For not letting him win. For speaking up. For being stronger than I think even you realized. I blinked back tears. I felt weak, I whispered. So many times. He shook his head. You were never weak. You were patient. You were careful. And then you were brave. I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. We didn't speak for a while after that. We didn't have to. The most unexpected part of the healing, though, wasn't how safe I felt with Mark again. It was how I felt with myself. I had always seen myself as the peacemaker. The calm one. The one who smoothed over tension and made everyone feel comfortable. But now I was someone who didn't let discomfort silence truth. Now I was someone who didn't confuse being polite with being passive. Now I was someone who could say, that's not okay, and mean it. And most importantly, now I was someone who trusted her own instincts again. There's a kind of silence that comes after the storm, not empty but sacred. That's what life began to feel like in the weeks after Nathan was gone. No more texts. No more shadows at the edges of my routine. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just space. And breath. And the slow rediscovery of who I had always been underneath the fear. One afternoon I sat on the back porch with a warm mug of tea and a journal resting on my knees. The garden was blooming again. Sunlight danced across the flowers. A light breeze moved through the trees. And I thought to myself, this is what healing looks like. Not fireworks. Not loud declarations. Just peace in a place that once held tension. Mark joined me a few minutes later, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand this time, and settled into the chair beside mine. We sat in silence for a while, something that had become easier between us. We no longer felt the need to fill every moment with words. The quiet was no longer uncomfortable. It was intimate. Eventually he reached for my hand. You seem lighter lately, he said, gently squeezing my fingers. I feel lighter, I said. Like I'm finally back in my own skin. He looked at me for a moment. I hate what happened to you, but I'm in awe of how you handled it. I smiled softly. I think for a while I forgot I was allowed to protect myself. That I didn't have to wait until something became unbearable to say it was wrong. You don't have to wait anymore, he said. Not with me. Not ever. There was something in his voice, humility, regret, love, that touched a part of me I didn't know was still healing. We weren't perfect, but we were growing. Together. That night as I got ready for bed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Same face. Same eyes. Same laugh lines. But something was different. There was clarity in my gaze. Confidence in my posture. A softness that didn't come from weakness, but from hard-won self-respect. I walked closer to the mirror and whispered to myself, not out loud but deep inside. You're not just someone's wife. You're not just someone's target. You are someone who survived. Someone who chose herself. Someone who speaks. And someone who is never going to shrink again. Life moved on after that. But I didn't go back to who I was before. I couldn't. Because now I had a voice that I trusted. Because now I knew the difference between being kind and being silent. Because now I knew that my boundaries were not up for negotiation. Nathan tried to shake me. He tried to reduce me to a secret, a shadow, a woman too afraid to speak. But he failed. And what he did, what he meant to be my weakness, became the very thing that led me back to my strength. So if you're reading this or hearing this and you've ever felt afraid to speak, if you've ever doubted what you felt or told yourself it wasn't bad enough to count, let me tell you, counts. You count. And your voice is stronger than you think. That was the story of how I got mine back. And I promise you, I'll never lose it again.